Close your eyes and let us drift to an England veiled in mist, an age when horse-drawn carriages rattled across cobblestone streets, when candle flames trembled in the draught of country manners, and when whispers carried more weight than proclamations. It is the 18th century, a world of powdered wigs, polished manners, and public virtue. But behind the polished masks of the aristocracy, another world was waiting, a hidden world where power and desire danced without restraint. The nobles of England played their parts in daylight, standing in Parliament, attending sermons, bowing before the old rhythms of church and crown. Yet when the sun slipped behind the hills, and shadows thickened like velvet curtains, some among them yearned for release. They sought not only pleasure, but freedom from the weight of duty, freedom from the sermons of bishops, freedom from the stiff bindings of respectability. And so, in quiet carriages, they rode through narrow country lanes, towards a place not marked on any map, a cave carved into chalk hills, a hollow in the earth, a secret temple where England's most powerful men would shed their masks and discover who they might become, when no eye of judgment watched them. This is the beginning of their story, a story of ritual and rebellion, of laughter turned into politics, of desire transformed into power. The story of the Hellfire Club, a name that even now carries the scent of mystery, the weight of scandal, and the soft echo of torchlight flickering underground. Let us linger for a moment upon the figure at the center of this hidden tale, Sir Francis Dashwood. He was not merely a man of wealth, not merely a gentleman of title, but a restless spirit with appetites too large to be contained by the narrow paths of respectability. By daylight, he wore the cloak of politics, a member of Parliament, a chancellor of the Exchequer, a man whose name echoed in the chambers of government. He dined with kings, he walked among ministers, and he was trusted to guard the prosperity of England. Yet beneath this mask of duty, he was something else entirely, a dreamer of forbidden dreams, a collector of scandalous books, a traveler who wandered through Italy, France, and the East, studying temples, ruins, and the rituals of civilizations long dead. In Rome, he had seen paintings and statues that the church called indecent, yet he saw in them not sin, but the language of freedom. In Greece, he traced his fingers along the marble of fallen shrines, imagining how men once worshipped, not with silence and submission, but with wine, song, and fearless joy. Dashwood returned to England carrying these visions in his mind, visions of temples lit by torchlight, of laughter echoing beneath vaulted ceilings, of rituals where masks freed the soul. Instead of binding it, he looked upon his fellow aristocrats, men bound by duty, chained by expectation, and he whispered to himself, "What if I could give them a place to be free?" Thus the seed was planted, a gathering not for politics alone, not for prayer in the strict tongue of the church, but for an unholy communion of wit, desire, and philosophy. Sir Francis Dashwood, with a smile that concealed 1,000 intentions, set out to build not merely a club, but a sanctuary, a hidden theater beneath the earth, where England's most powerful souls could play without fear of consequence. And so begins the tale of ambition that would ripple across nations and centuries, an ambition that would be cloaked in scandal, yet burn with the light of new ideas. Beneath the rolling hills of Buckinghamshire, the earth was soft with chalk and ancient stone. It was here that Sir Francis Dashwood looked, not upward toward the heavens, but downward into the depths. The countryside was quiet, its fields golden with harvest, its villages small and devout. No villager knew that beneath their very feet, a vast labyrinth was being carved, a network of passages and chambers, meant not for the light of day, but for the glow of hidden torches. Miners chipped and cut the chalk, their tools striking echoes that seemed like whispers of the underworld. Slowly the caves took shape, a banquet hall that stretched like the nave of a church, side passages where secrets could be spoken in hushed tones, hidden alcoves where shadows seemed alive. The deeper the tunnels wound, the more they resembled the catacombs of Rome, the ancient mystery chambers of Eleusis, the grottos of forgotten gods. Water was guided into channels, its surface catching and bending the flicker of flame. Ventilation shafts were crafted with cunning precision, so that smoke would rise and vanish, leaving the air cool and clear, as though even the earth conspired to keep these secrets. Dashwood walked the passages by lamplight, his footsteps slow, his eyes alight with satisfaction. Here, beneath the soil of England, he was creating not merely a cave, but a stage, a theater where rituals of wit, blasphemy, and freedom could unfold far from the gaze of bishops and kings. It was a descent not just into earth, but into imagination itself, a sacred inversion. While the churches pointed heavenward with spires and bells, the Hellfire Club would root itself in the underworld, embracing the shadows as its holy ground. When the last stone was cleared, and the final torch set in place, Dashwood looked upon his secret cathedral. It was not consecrated with prayer, nor blessed with holy water, yet it was ready for laughter, for sin, for philosophy spoken with wine-stained lips. The caves of Buckinghamshire, quiet beneath the hills, awaited their first congregation. And so, in silence and secrecy, the temple of the Hellfire Club was born. Word did not travel through proclamations, nor through letters sealed with wax. It moved instead like a sigh in the dark, passed from lips that smiled too knowingly, from hands that lingered in handshake too long. One by one, men of power heard the invitation, not spoken aloud in taverns, nor written in ink, but carried in whispers at court, or hinted during a pause in Parliament. A place had been made, they were told, a place away from judgment, away from the stiff gaze of bishops, a sanctuary where masks could be removed. And they came, lords, ministers, poets, actors, even men whose names would one day echo in history books. By day they stood in offices of state, wearing robes of solemn dignity. By night, cloaked in secrecy, they descended into the chalk-dark passageways, their torches bobbing like stars in a midnight sky. The first gatherings were tentative, as though testing the strength of silence. Laughter was hushed, eyes darted nervously to the shadows, but Dashwood guided them with calm assurance. Here, he told them, you are safe. Here, you need not pretend. Wine was poured into silver cups, candles lit to chase back the damp of stone. The air filled with warmth, with voices freed from restraint. And slowly, the masks of society, those heavy veils of reputation, began to slip away. No record survives of the exact words spoken that night, but we may imagine the mingling of satire and sincerity, mock sermons that twisted scripture into jest, toasts that mocked the solemn rituals of church and court. Yet beneath the laughter, serious questions stirred. What is freedom? What is power, if not the courage to live unmasked? What is virtue, if it cannot withstand laughter? That first night was more than revelry. It was the creation of a bond, woven through shared transgression, a covenant of secrecy, a vow that what passed in the caves would never rise again into daylight. And so the Hellfire Club was born, not with the thunder of revolt, nor the clash of armies, but with wine, with whispers, and with the quiet courage of men who dared to imagine a world without chains. The cave lay heavy with silence, its walls glistening with the damp breath of the earth. Torches flickered, casting shadows that swayed like restless spirits. It was the night of the first initiation. A small group had gathered, cloaked and hooded, their faces half hidden, their eyes burning with anticipation. They were men accustomed to commanding armies, to steering the policies of kingdoms. Yet here, underground, they came as supplicants, willing to surrender to something larger than themselves. Dashwood, their host and master of ceremonies, stood at the head of the chamber. He raised a cup of dark wine, its surface trembling with firelight. In his voice there was no solemnity of priest or bishop, but a low, playful command. Cast off the masks of day and enter the freedom of night. One by one, the initiates stepped forward, They placed hands upon stone and spoke words not of loyalty to crown or church, but of loyalty to one another. Their oaths were woven with satire and jest, yet the laughter that followed sealed them tighter than any official vow. Some kissed mock relics, a parody of saints' bones and sacred texts, symbols twisted into irony. Others donned masks, not to hide themselves, but to become someone freer, someone more true. Wine spilled upon the ground was taken as a libation, a gift to the earth that sheltered their secrets. When at last the circle was complete, when all had spoken, drunk, and laughed, the cavern erupted in voices. Songs rose, bawdy and clever, echoing against the chalk-white walls. Laughter rang until it blurred into something deeper, a release, a loosening of burdens carried too long. It was more than ceremony. It was transformation. Men who by daylight were bound in chains of etiquette, in chains of expectation, felt those chains fall away, and in their place grew a bond of secrecy, a brotherhood forged in shadow. When dawn crept at last across the fields above, the initiates returned to their homes. To the world they were unchanged, lords, politicians, scholars, respectable men. But within they carried something new, a spark, a fire lit beneath the earth. The Hellfire Club had claimed its first souls, and the echo of their laughter would ripple outward, far beyond the chalk hills, far beyond the quiet villages, into the very fabric of England's future. Imagine now the air thick with candle smoke, the walls echoing whispers, laughter, and the soft clink of silver cups. The Hellfire Club was not merely a gathering, it was a theater, a stage upon which the masks of society could fall, and the truths of the human spirit could dance freely. Every movement, every gesture, every toast was deliberate. It was a performance that balanced on the edge of danger and delight. The initiates learned to speak in codes, to laugh at piety while bowing to power, to celebrate irreverence while plotting futures unseen. Rituals were enacted with precision, mock sermons that twisted scripture into satire, banquets that combined indulgence with cunning play, theatrical displays that turned the banal into the sublime. Here, the mind was sharpened, the will tempered, and the courage to confront both the world and oneself was born. In the shadows, identities shifted. A lord might kneel where he once commanded. A scholar might jest where he once preached. The stage demanded honesty, but only honesty that could survive the mask of performance. It was a delicate art, the art of being both hidden and revealed, both playful and serious, both sinner and philosopher. The theater of secrecy was more than entertainment. It was instruction. Through satire, through mockery, through shared indulgence, members learned the rhythms of influence and persuasion, the subtle art of reading men as easily as texts, the invisible currents that moved the tides of power. By candlelight, beneath the earth, England's future conspirators, poets, thinkers, and statesmen practiced their craft not in open halls, but in the sacred shadows of a theater unknown to the world. And in that theater, they discovered not only one another, but themselves, as they would never be again above ground. Beneath the hills, in the hush of chalk walls, the familiar rules of faith were turned upside down. The Hellfire Club did not merely mock religion for sport. It explored it as a theater of the mind, a mirror in which power, fear, and desire were reflected. Mock sermons rolled from the lips of the initiates, twisting scripture into jest, turning solemn hymns into laughter, yet always with a careful hand. For blasphemy here was not chaos, but a key, a tool to open the doors of thought, to question authority, to explore what lies beyond obedience. Cups were lifted not to saints, but to liberty, to intellect, to the hidden currents of the human heart. Candles flickered on carved altars, where once only devotion would have dwelled, and in those flickering shadows, members confronted both fear and curiosity, learning that faith need not imprison, and that doubt could illuminate. This inversion was a game, but it was a serious game. It taught the power of symbols, the sway of ritual, and the strength that comes from seeing the world as it might be, rather than as tradition demanded. Here, beneath the earth, the line between sacred and profane blurred. The mockery was precise, the laughter disciplined, and the consequences of thought weighed as heavily as the consequences of action. In the theater of blasphemy, men discovered freedom, freedom of mind, freedom of spirit, and freedom to experiment with the raw, unpolished material of human existence. And in this sacred play of shadows and wine, the Hellfire Club found its soul. In the flickering torchlight of the chalk chambers, faces appeared and disappeared beneath masks of leather, velvet, and gilded lace. Here, the veil was not merely costume, it was liberation. Each mask allowed the wearer to step beyond the burdens of title and reputation. A lord could laugh as freely as a fool, a scholar could speak with the audacity of a prophet, and a man whose life above ground was rigid with etiquette could move with the fluidity of shadows. These disguises were more than protection. They were instruments of revelation. Behind the mask, desire could be explored, curiosity unbound, and secrets shared without fear. One's true self was neither erased nor exposed. It was magnified, layered in ways the world above could never comprehend. The initiates learned the subtle art of persona, of becoming multiple selves at once, of wearing one face in public, another in private, and yet another in the deepest corners of the club. It was a practice in psychology before psychology existed, an understanding of identity as a living, malleable force. Trust, paradoxically, grew through these disguises. Each man knew that the other, too, had surrendered to play. And in this mutual vulnerability, loyalty was born. Secrets became currency, and the mask became both shield and key. Here beneath the hills, the Hellfire Club was teaching its most essential lesson: that power, wisdom, and freedom could flourish only when the self could move beyond constraint and embrace both shadow and light, both the known and the hidden, within the chambers of the soul. Among the flickering torches and vaulted halls, women moved with quiet authority, their presence neither ornament nor afterthought. They were scholars, performers, courtesans, and companions, and in their minds and gestures lay a subtle, undeniable power. These women were not simply participants in indulgence. They were architects of thought, guides through the labyrinth of desire and intellect. With a glance, a word, a smile, they could shift the balance of conversation, redirecting the currents of influence with elegance. Some read from forbidden texts, their voices echoing through the chambers, turning ideas into living experiments. Some danced lightly, weaving through masked men, their movements a lesson in observation, intuition, and strategy. Some whispered not for scandal, but to teach subtlety and the art of persuasion. In a society that publicly diminished their power, these women commanded it here, behind the veil of secrecy. They were not silent witnesses, but active participants in the creation of thought, in the shaping of debates, and in the crafting of the very rituals that bound the club together. Their intelligence, wit, and allure were inseparable, tools wielded with grace and precision. Through them, the Hellfire Club learned that influence does not always come from strength alone, but from insight, perception, and the courage to act unseen. Beneath the hills, in the candlelit chambers, women and men together discovered a new language of power where knowledge, desire, and freedom could intermingle, and the world above could never quite comprehend. The lessons learned in shadow and secrecy. Even in the deepest shadows of the chalk halls, the currents of power never ceased. Here, in the flicker of torchlight, politics and desire intertwined like twin vines climbing the walls, each feeding and shaping the other. A minister might lean close to a courtesan, his words soft yet weighted with ambition, while a lord toasted to freedom and rebellion, his eyes measuring allies and rivals alike. Every laugh, every whispered jest, carried the potential to influence far beyond the chamber walls. In these secret nights, debates flourished, not with the pomp of parliament, but with the intimacy of shared indulgence. Policy and philosophy were tested alongside pleasure, ideas measured not only by their logic, but by their resonance in the human heart. Desire was never simple. It was instrument, mirror, and lesson. Through it, members explored trust, manipulation, loyalty, and betrayal, practicing the subtle arts that would govern kingdoms and commerce, alliances and revolutions, all under the guise of revelry. And yet, there was no cruelty here, no exploitation without purpose. Each encounter, each flirtation, each whispered plot was part of the grand experiment, to understand human nature, to probe the depths of identity, and to prepare for the challenges of the world above. In the mingling of politics and desire, the Hellfire Club discovered its secret strength. That power is not merely held, but performed, experienced, and understood through laughter, intimacy, and the careful orchestration of trust. And so, as the candles burned low, the initiates returned to their lives above ground, their hearts carrying the lessons of shadowed halls, their minds sharpened by the delicate balance of pleasure, cunning, and freedom. The theater of secrecy had begun its work. The Hellfire Club had become more than a club. It had become a laboratory of the human soul. Deep beneath the earth, amidst the flickering torches and shadows, there existed another treasure, quieter yet infinitely more powerful than wine or laughter. Shelves lined the walls, carved into the chalk itself, and upon them rested books that the world above called dangerous, forbidden, or heretical. These were not mere volumes of entertainment. They were repositories of thought, of rebellion, of possibility. Ancient philosophers whose ideas had been silenced, poets exiled from polite society, treatises on magic, ritual, and the very nature of the human mind. To hold one of these books was to touch a spark of freedom. To read was to step beyond the strict confines of dogma, to enter the minds of those who had dared to imagine differently. Dashwood and his initiates treated each page as sacred, not for devotion, but for illumination. The library was alive with whispers. A scholar would lean close to a passage on government, while another traced his finger along diagrams of ancient rites. The words on the pages were not static. They were rehearsals of thought, experiments to be performed in the living theater of the caves. Here, knowledge was transgressive. It challenged the monarchy. It questioned the church. It dared to imagine the individual freed from the strictures of hierarchy. And yet, it was more than rebellion. It was education, a careful, deliberate training of the mind to see beyond appearances, to measure cause and consequence, to navigate the unseen currents of power and desire. The shelves of dangerous books were the heart of the Hellfire Club, a quiet, enduring flame, illuminating the corridors of thought, even as the torches flickered in the shadows. Amid the flickering candlelight and the hush of chalk halls, the Hellfire Club did not merely read the past, they breathed it. Dashwood and his initiates sought the wisdom of ancient civilizations, the rituals and mysteries long buried beneath time and stone. From the temples of Greece to the catacombs of Rome, from the secret cults of Egypt to the mystics of the East, they drew inspiration, translating the rites of distant worlds into ceremonies that could unfold beneath English hills. Every gesture, every symbol, every word in their rituals was measured with precision, echoing practices designed to awaken the mind, to challenge the spirit, to free the soul from the narrow confines of convention. Through these ceremonies, initiates experienced transformation. Masks were worn, roles assumed, and identity became a fluid instrument, as ancient practitioners once understood it. Music, movement, and the scent of herbs worked together to lift consciousness, to expand perception, to reveal the hidden connections between thought, desire, and power. It was a form of living philosophy, not written in dry treatises or spoken in courtly debate, but enacted, felt, and internalized. The past, revived in the shadows, became a guide to the present and a laboratory for the future. In this revival of ancient mysteries, the Hellfire Club was doing more than play. It was cultivating minds capable of seeing beyond tradition, minds prepared to navigate the complexities of politics, desire, and revolution, all while the world above remained unaware of the depth of knowledge being forged beneath its feet. In the quiet of the chalk halls, thought took on a life of its own. Here, philosophy was not confined to dusty classrooms or solemn debates. It was lived, enacted, and tested. Dashwood and his initiates explored ideas considered dangerous, ideas that questioned the foundations of monarchy, church, and society. Skepticism was cultivated as a skill, not as rebellion for its own sake, but as a tool to understand the machinery of power and the nature of man. Satire became their instrument. Mock sermons, bawdy songs, and playful parodies taught subtle lessons in observation and persuasion. Through laughter, they dissected hypocrisy, measured influence, and glimpsed the fragile truths beneath public virtue. Radical thought thrived here. Members debated the rights of man, the limits of authority, the possibilities of social reform. Ideas that might have been crushed in polite society were nurtured, refined, and tested. Within the controlled freedom of the underground theater, every toast, every jest, every whispered argument was an experiment in psychology, a rehearsal for the challenges above ground. They learned how beliefs could be shaped, how opinion could be swayed, how the subtle currents of desire, fear, and ambition could be measured, and, when necessary, harnessed. In this secret world, philosophy was not abstract. It was living, breathing, and dangerous. It prepared the mind to move unseen, to navigate both society and self, to bend tradition without breaking it, and to emerge from shadow, armed with insight, wit, and subtle power. Within the secret chambers of the Hellfire Club, pleasure and fear were carefully intertwined, not to punish, but to illuminate the depths of human consciousness. A torch flickered over a masked face. A cup of wine passed slowly from hand to hand, and every gesture carried more than indulgence. It carried lesson, experiment, and revelation. Pleasure was studied as an instrument of insight. Laughter, desire, and intimacy became tools through which initiates explored loyalty, trust, and influence. They discovered that the human mind opens most willingly when curiosity and desire are engaged, and that bonds forged in joy could endure more strongly than those imposed by fear alone. Yet fear had its place as well. Not terror, not cruelty, but the controlled, measured uncertainty that sharpened attention and strengthened perception. The unexpected twist in a ritual, the sudden change of mask or role, the playful inversion of power, all train the mind to adapt, to respond with clarity, to hold oneself steady amidst the unknown. In these chambers, pleasure and fear were not enemies. They were partners in education, in the laboratory of human nature. They revealed the fragility and resilience of identity, the subtle sway of emotion, and the hidden pathways through which influence and freedom could travel. And when the candles burned low, and the initiates returned to the world above, they carried within them a quiet mastery of self, a readiness for the challenges of politics, desire, and the ever-shifting currents of society. The Hellfire Club was not merely a playground. It was a school for the soul, a crucible in which the deepest truths of humanity were observed, tested, and refined. In the dim glow of the underground chambers, a different kind of alchemy took place. Not the alchemy of gold, but the transformation of trust, of friendship forged in shadow, and loyalty tempered through shared transgression. Each secret shared beneath the hills was a thread woven into an invisible tapestry, a whispered confession, a daring jest, a bold experiment in thought or desire. Each bound the initiates closer together. They learned that the value of a secret was not in its novelty, but in the mutual understanding it demanded. To betray it would be to unravel the bonds of brotherhood, to break not just a promise, but the fragile fabric of shared transformation. Here, loyalty was not blind obedience. It was a conscious choice, a recognition that in secrecy there is power, and in trust there is freedom. The laughter, the rituals, the forbidden texts, all served as instruments to teach men the profound strength of discretion. And so, beneath the earth, the Hellfire Club became more than a society of indulgence. It became a laboratory for human connection, for the subtle interplay of trust, for the understanding that influence is earned through integrity and cunning alike. As the torches guttered low, and the echoes of the night's ceremonies faded, the initiates carried these bonds back to the world above. There in daylight, they would wear masks of propriety, yet within, the secret ties of loyalty, discretion, and shared discovery would guide their actions, their choices, and their very destiny. Though the caves of Buckinghamshire were hidden beneath quiet hills, their influence reached far beyond England. The Hellfire Club was not confined to a single nation, nor to a single generation. It was a node in a vast, invisible network, stretching across continents and oceans. Letters traveled under seal, messages passed in code, and ideas crossed borders more swiftly than armies. Merchants, diplomats, thinkers, and statesmen moved within this web, their actions guided by knowledge gleaned in candlelit chambers far from prying eyes. Even across the Atlantic, voices of the club whispered through corridors of power. Men like Benjamin Franklin found in its rituals and texts not just amusement, but insights into liberty, governance, and human nature. Philosophies tested underground were applied to revolutions above ground, to colonies and capitals, to the very foundations of emerging nations. The club was a laboratory of influence. Political strategy, economic innovation, and social insight were refined in private, then deployed publicly with subtlety and precision. It was an education in power that combined psychology, observation, and discretion. And yet, the most remarkable aspect was its invisibility. No banner proclaimed its reach, no armies bore its insignia. Its strength lay in subtlety, in the quiet shaping of minds, and in the disciplined exercise of trust and secrecy. Through this international web, the Hellfire Club extended its shadow over history itself, not with force, but with ideas, influence, and the extraordinary courage to explore what society above could not yet imagine. Beneath the chalk hills, rituals unfolded that the world above would have considered unthinkable, even dangerous. Yet for the initiates of the Hellfire Club, these ceremonies were not mere indulgence, they were deliberate experiments in morality, psychology, and social dynamics. Every gesture, every toast, every act of inversion was carefully designed to probe boundaries. They questioned obedience, explored desire, and tested the resilience of human ethics. It was a controlled space where the effects of power, secrecy, and transgression could be observed and understood. Ethics here were not dictated by dogma, but discovered through action. The consequences of mischief, manipulation, and indulgence were measured with both wit and seriousness. Through mock blasphemy, through satirical ceremony, through tests of courage and restraint, members explored the limits of conscience and the nature of responsibility. Yet the goal was never chaos. Each ritual had purpose: to illuminate human behavior, to teach discernment, to cultivate empathy and awareness within the bonds of secrecy. Pleasure and fear became instruments, observation became education, and the underground halls became classrooms for the psychology of conduct. And when the candles burned down to their last flickers, when the laughter faded and the shadows grew still, the initiates emerged not as the same men who had entered, but as those who had glimpsed the subtle balance of freedom, morality, and human nature, a knowledge the world above could neither see nor understand. Within the underground halls, every detail was designed to shape the mind and stir the soul. The Hellfire Club understood that power did not exist solely in politics or ritual, but in the environment itself, in the echo of footsteps, the curve of a wall, the resonance of a carefully struck note. Music flowed through the chambers like a living force, Ancient melodies, composed and adapted, wove together the senses, lifting the spirit, sharpening attention, and coaxing courage from fear. A single chord could calm tension or spark revelation, as if the walls themselves were instruments, playing the secret symphony of the human mind. The architecture was equally intentional. Vaulted ceilings, hidden niches, narrow corridors opening into wide halls, all orchestrated to evoke awe, anticipation, and introspection. Ventilation systems carried scents and smoke in precise patterns, lighting sculpted shadows to stir imagination, and artificial waterways mirrored the flicker of candlelight in a dance of reflection and thought. Environmental psychology, though unnamed, was practiced with mastery. Every element, the smell of herbs, the coolness of stone, the echo of laughter, was part of the lesson. The spaces themselves became teachers, guiding the initiates' minds toward insight, adaptation, and subtle understanding. Through music, architecture, and carefully curated surroundings, the Hellfire Club transformed simple halls into laboratories of consciousness. Here, the mind could be observed, challenged, and expanded, even as the world above remained unaware of the invisible influence being shaped beneath its feet. While the world above debated in salons and lecture halls, the Hellfire Club quietly became an engine of intellectual evolution. Here, in the flicker of candlelight and shadow, ideas were not merely discussed, they were tested, refined, and lived. Philosophy, politics, and social theory intertwined. With ritual, observation, and experiment, members explored concepts of liberty, justice, and human nature. Long before they appeared in pamphlets or parliamentary debates, they questioned authority, not to destroy it recklessly, but to understand its mechanisms, and to prepare themselves for the thoughtful exercise of influence. The club functioned as a crucible of Enlightenment ideals. Skepticism was cultivated, reason was celebrated, and the courage to challenge inherited truths was nurtured under controlled conditions. By testing ideas in shadow before applying them in light, members gained both insight and discretion, learning to guide society subtly, without alerting those unprepared for the depths of thought. In the hush of the underground chambers, books, rituals, and conversation became instruments of intellectual experimentation. The club's influence extended silently across Europe and the Atlantic, seeding revolutionary ideas, shaping the frameworks of emerging societies, and preparing minds capable of blending insight with action. Here beneath the hills, the Enlightenment was not a distant ideal. It was a lived experience, a secret laboratory where thought itself was a tool, and where the future of ideas was forged, before the world above would ever know it. Within the hidden halls of the Hellfire Club, secrets were not merely kept, they were cultivated. Every whispered word, every hidden gesture, was a thread in a complex tapestry of trust and influence. Loyalty here was both shield and currency. It was forged through shared vulnerability, through the mutual understanding that what transpired in shadow must never leave the sanctity of the chambers. To betray this trust was to unravel more than a promise. It was to break the bonds of knowledge, strategy, and power itself. Psychological strategy was woven into every ritual, every toast, every jest. Members observed one another with precision, learning the subtle signs of ambition, fear, and desire. They studied how the mind bends under pressure, how allegiance can be earned or tested, and how influence flows unseen through networks of intimacy and discretion. The interplay of secrecy and loyalty became an art. It trained initiates to navigate the world above, with insight and subtlety, to understand both friend and rival, and to act with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the currents of the human mind. And so, beneath the earth, the Hellfire Club honed not only its rituals and philosophy, but the very intelligence of its members, an intelligence that combined cunning, empathy, and courage, preparing them for a world that would never glimpse the invisible education unfolding in candlelit shadows. Though hidden beneath English hills, the ideas cultivated in the Hellfire Club did not remain confined to its underground halls. They traveled silently, carried by letters, conversation, and the minds of its members, reaching across oceans and continents. In the colonies of America, revolutionary thought found fertile ground. The lessons learned in shadow, the careful study of power, the questioning of authority, the understanding of loyalty and influence, were applied to new governments and new societies. In France, too, the whispers of change were shaped by the psychology and strategy honed in the chalk chambers. The daring to challenge tradition, the courage to experiment with governance, the ability to see beyond the dictates of monarchy and orthodoxy, all had their quiet genesis here. The club's members did not wield armies, nor did they storm palaces. Their revolution was subtler, more enduring. It was the revolution of the mind. Through thought, observation, and ritual, they prepared leaders capable of understanding the hidden dynamics of society, ready to act when opportunity arose. And though the world above rarely recognized their influence, history itself bears the imprint of these secret laboratories of intellect and strategy. The Hellfire Club had discovered that transformation does not always come from force, but from the patient, deliberate shaping of thought, the quiet cultivation of insight, and the disciplined practice of influence in shadowed halls. Within the candlelit chambers of the Hellfire Club, art and literature were not mere decoration, they were instruments of thought, vehicles through which ideas, influence, and subtle truths could be transmitted. Paintings adorned hidden walls, depicting allegories that teased the mind, where pleasure and morality intertwined, and where observers were invited to read between the lines. Literature was shared, whispered, and enacted. Ancient texts, forbidden poetry, and philosophical treatises became living lessons in perception, desire, and human behavior. The members themselves were patrons, creators, and performers. They commissioned works that challenged orthodoxy, that encoded ideas in symbol and metaphor, that asked the viewer to question, to ponder, to perceive more than the surface. In music and performance, in verse and design, they embedded insights into human nature, transforming entertainment into education and amusement into subtle instruction. Through cultural patronage, the club extended its influence beyond the chambers. Ideas seeded in secret found expression in salons, theaters, and manuscripts, touching minds that might never step foot in the chalk halls. Art became a silent language of power, a bridge between hidden understanding and the world above, ensuring that the innovations of thought and the experiments in identity would ripple outward through society long after the candles had burned low. Beneath the flickering torchlight, the Hellfire Club was not only a laboratory of mind and ritual, but also of commerce and trust. The bonds forged in secrecy became invisible channels of cooperation, allowing members to engage in ventures above ground, with confidence that others would honor their word. Trust, earned in the crucible of shared transgression, transformed into economic advantage. Investments, partnerships, and negotiations were guided not merely by profit, but by understanding of human behavior, by foresight sharpened in shadowed halls. Members pioneered practices that would echo through centuries. They experimented with credit, risk, and the psychology of markets, learning how perception and reputation could shape economic outcomes. Subtlety and discretion were as important as capital, and loyalty became a currency more valuable than gold. Through these networks, innovation flourished. Ideas about production, trade, and investment were refined in private, then applied in public spheres with extraordinary precision. The club had discovered that the human mind, guided carefully, could generate wealth and influence in ways that laws and contracts alone could never guarantee. And so, the Hellfire Club became a silent architect of economic progress, its teachings embedded in networks of trust, its lessons in psychology and discretion, applied in boardrooms, marketplaces, and banks, long after the torches in the underground halls had flickered out. Even in a place designed to master the human mind, the boundaries of identity could be tested too far. By the 1770s, some initiates began to experience disorientation, fragments of self splintering under the strain of continual role-playing, ritual inversion, and philosophical experimentation. The very techniques that had cultivated insight and courage now revealed their peril. Masks worn for study and pleasure sometimes clung too tightly, and the line between performance and reality blurred. Initiates confronted confusion, anxiety, and the subtle terror of losing oneself in the multiplicity of selves. Dashwood, ever the observer and experimenter, developed strategies to restore equilibrium. Ancient rituals were adapted, female-guided emotional exercises were incorporated, and ceremonies introduced controlled unpredictability to strengthen psychological resilience. Through careful guidance, the initiates learned to integrate their personas, to retain autonomy while exploring identity, and to embrace the lessons of fluidity without losing core integrity. The crises were more than personal, they were systemic. They revealed the limits of even the most advanced psychological experimentation, and reminded the club that mastery required humility, reflection, and compassion. From these trials emerged not weakness, but a deeper understanding of consciousness itself, a readiness to navigate complexity both within and beyond the chalk walls. In the shadows, the Hellfire Club evolved. Its members emerged wiser, their minds sharpened by the intimate dance of risk, discovery, and recovery, prepared to apply these lessons to the unseen currents of society above. In the underground halls, order and chaos were not enemies, but partners in education. The Hellfire Club deliberately wove unpredictability into its rituals, its performances, and its gatherings, not to unsettle, but to strengthen the mind. Initiates were placed in scenarios that tested adaptability. Unexpected twists in ceremony, sudden role reversals, and playful subversions of expectation were all designed to cultivate psychological flexibility. The lessons were subtle: to navigate uncertainty with calm, to perceive hidden patterns, to respond creatively when circumstances shifted. Pleasure and fear, laughter and awe were carefully balanced, each contributing to the development of mental resilience. Members learned that mastery of self required not rigid control, but the ability to flow with change, to embrace the unknown, and to transform challenge into insight. This controlled chaos became a lifelong skill. In public life, in politics, and in personal relations, the initiates could navigate social currents with poise and strategy, anticipating reactions, measuring influence, and guiding outcomes with subtle precision. Beneath the earth, the club had created a laboratory of consciousness, where unpredictability was teacher, adaptability was curriculum, and the mind, once tested and trained, emerged capable of navigating both shadow and light, ready to shape the world above, with wisdom, courage, and subtle power. In the secret chambers, creativity was intertwined with philosophy and psychology. Every painting, every performance, every written word was a lesson in subtlety, perception, and moral complexity. Art was more than decoration, it was a language of influence. Allegorical paintings depicted transgression and virtue, inviting the observer to interpret, to question, to discern hidden meanings beneath the surface. Theatrical performances blurred the lines between right and wrong, pleasure and restraint, truth and illusion. Moral ambiguity became a tool for insight. Initiates learned that human behavior could not be reduced to simple rules. By witnessing, participating in, and reflecting on ambiguous scenarios, they honed their ability to navigate the real world with discernment and subtlety. In these spaces, creativity was also strategy. Symbol, narrative, and gesture were analyzed as instruments through which influence could be exerted, alliances formed, and ideas subtly transmitted beyond the walls. Through art, the club trained minds to perceive depth where others saw only surface, to understand nuance, and to act with intelligence shaped by both imagination and ethics. The shadows of these chambers carried not only candlelight, but lessons in observation, judgment, and the transformative power of expression. While the world above pursued politics in the light of day, the Hellfire Club quietly nurtured a network of influence beneath it. Membership spanned aristocrats, politicians, and thinkers, each connected through bonds of trust, secrecy, and shared understanding. Within these chambers, governance was studied not as abstract theory, but as living practice. Debates, role-playing, and ritualized exercises revealed the hidden levers of power, the motivations that drive men, and the subtle forces shaping society. Letters and conversations carried ideas across the country and across the seas. Initiates returned to their offices and estates armed not only with knowledge, but with insights into psychology, persuasion, and strategy. They could anticipate rivals, influence outcomes, and guide decisions with discretion and finesse. The club's network functioned as an invisible government of thought, where loyalty and observation became as crucial as titles or offices. It demonstrated that true influence often operates unseen, that the subtle shaping of ideas can precede action, and that power is as much about understanding minds as wielding authority. In this hidden nexus, the Hellfire Club trained men to navigate complexity with calm and precision, preparing them to act effectively in both public and private spheres. Their strategies grounded in observation, insight, and the quiet lessons of shadowed halls. Amidst the candlelit chambers, the Hellfire Club was more than a space for secrecy and indulgence. It was a laboratory for understanding the mind and the heart. Members experimented with methods that would, centuries later, be recognized as early psychology. Emotional states were observed, guided, and, when necessary, recalibrated. Rituals were designed not only to entertain, but to teach empathy, resilience, and emotional mastery. Initiates confronted fear, desire, and uncertainty in controlled settings, learning to navigate their own reactions and those of others. They studied the interplay of pleasure and restraint, joy and tension, humor and solemnity. Each experience became a lesson in self-awareness and interpersonal insight. The club's guidance emphasized balance. It was not coercion, but the cultivation of insight and discretion, the training of emotional intelligence to anticipate motives, and the shaping of conduct to achieve both personal and collective goals. Through these practices, members emerged not only clever, but psychologically sophisticated. They carried into the world above a rare mastery of mind and emotion, able to influence, negotiate, and inspire with subtlety. Their education grounded in the intimate, transformative lessons of the underground halls. Though hidden beneath the earth, the lessons of the Hellfire Club extended far into the structures of society above. Members applied their understanding of human behavior, observation, and strategy to industries, agriculture, and law, fields where psychology and discretion could shape outcomes. In industry, they observed labor dynamics, discovering how motivation, trust, and social structure could enhance productivity and harmony. In agriculture, patterns of cooperation and innovation were refined, leading to methods that balanced efficiency with human insight. Even the law was approached with subtlety. Justice, they understood, is not only the application of rules, but the guidance of behavior, perception, and consequence. By understanding human psychology, they could influence outcomes, craft systems that maintained order, and subtly reform processes from within. Through these applications, the club's influence became tangible, though largely invisible. Their lessons in secrecy, loyalty, and observation were translated into structures that governed real lives, shaping society with the quiet power of insight, preparing the world for changes that would only later be recognized as the fruits of their hidden wisdom. Contrary to the rigid norms of 18th century society, women played active and essential roles within the Hellfire Club. They were not passive spectators, nor merely decorative companions. They were intellectual, artistic, and psychological participants, guiding rituals, shaping discourse, and influencing outcomes. Women acted as courtesans, actresses, and confidantes, their presence enriching the experiments in human behavior and social interaction. Through conversation, performance, and subtle intervention, they taught initiates about empathy, emotional authenticity, and influence. Their role in the club was both practical and symbolic. They demonstrated that insight and power were not exclusive to men, and that understanding human nature required collaboration across gender. By participating in ceremonies, debates, and social strategy, they contributed to the psychological laboratory that the club had so carefully constructed. In doing so, women helped to expand the horizons of identity, challenged rigid societal expectations, and provided models for subtlety, persuasion, and adaptability that men alone could not have cultivated. Within these underground halls, the presence of women was a catalyst for richer insight, deeper understanding, and a more complete mastery of human dynamics. Though the Hellfire Club convened in shadowed halls beneath English soil, its reach extended across oceans, touching the minds of thinkers, statesmen, and revolutionaries alike. Letters sealed with discretion traveled across the Atlantic, carrying discussions of liberty, governance, and human nature. Ideas tested in ritual and debate in Buckinghamshire found fertile ground in the colonies of America, where men like Benjamin Franklin absorbed not only knowledge, but the subtle lessons of observation, trust, and psychological strategy. The club's practices were quietly revolutionary. They cultivated the courage to question authority, to challenge inherited structures, and to explore new forms of social and political organization. By the time these concepts arrived in distant lands, they had been refined, measured, and embedded with foresight. This transatlantic connection illustrates a profound truth. The shaping of history is often invisible, carried not by armies alone, but by ideas, relationships, and the careful study of human behavior. The Hellfire Club, in its secrecy, had become an incubator of change, preparing minds capable of conceiving revolutions before the world even recognized the need for them. In the underground halls, secrecy was cultivated as both shield and sword. Every conversation, ritual, and observation became a lesson in discretion, an exercise in understanding how hidden knowledge could shape public affairs. The Hellfire Club recognized that true power often lies unseen. By controlling what was revealed, when and to whom, members learned to influence decisions, sway opinion, and guide events without overt authority. The ability to hold and wield secrets became a form of strategy, a subtle leverage that extended influence far beyond their chambers. Trust and loyalty were inseparable from this power. Shared vulnerabilities created bonds, ensuring that confidential insights could be exchanged safely, while missteps or betrayal were carefully monitored. In this environment, political acumen was sharpened through understanding both human behavior and the dynamics of secrecy. Through these practices, members emerged capable of navigating the complexities of governance, anticipating reactions, and orchestrating outcomes with precision. The Hellfire Club transformed secrecy into a sophisticated instrument, demonstrating that the unseen hand, guided by knowledge and observation, could often accomplish more than visible authority ever could. Within the hidden chambers of the Hellfire Club, philosophy was not confined to books or debates. It was enacted, tested, and lived. Members explored questions of morality, duty, and desire through ritual, dialogue, and carefully designed scenarios. Every transgression, every inversion of social norms, was a means to examine the boundaries of ethics and conscience. They asked, what guides human behavior when societal rules are suspended? How does desire shape decision-making? Where does personal freedom end and responsibility begin? Through these experiments, initiates cultivated insight into both themselves and others. They learned that moral frameworks are flexible, that human nature is layered, and that understanding complexity requires courage and observation. philosophy became a living practice. It was interwoven with art, ritual, and social interaction, creating a laboratory where thought, emotion, and action converged. In this way, the club trained its members not merely to theorize, but to embody understanding, to navigate ethical ambiguity, and to wield discernment in both private and public life. In the shadowed chambers, identity was both fluid and deliberate. The Hellfire Club designed rituals not only to entertain, but to challenge members' perceptions of self and other. Masks were worn, roles reversed, and personas explored, allowing initiates to inhabit multiple selves within a controlled, sacred space. Through these exercises, they confronted desires, fears, and ambitions, learning to observe the mind in motion and to guide behavior with awareness. This exploration of identity served both psychological and social purposes. It taught flexibility, empathy, and the ability to anticipate reactions. It also reinforced loyalty and trust, as shared vulnerability bound members together, creating a network of understanding that transcended titles or rank. The rituals were transformative, shaping not only individual consciousness, but also the collective intelligence of the club. They demonstrated that identity is not fixed, that insight arises from experience, reflection, and experimentation, and that the mastery of self is inseparable from the mastery of influence. In both hidden and visible worlds, deep within the halls, the Hellfire Club maintained a library unlike any other. Its shelves were lined with books and manuscripts deemed dangerous, heretical, or subversive. Ancient texts on religion, philosophy, and politics were studied alongside treatises on human behavior, magic, and the occult. Every volume was a key to understanding the unseen forces shaping society, a guide to navigating power, morality, and consciousness itself. Members did not merely read, they engaged, questioned, and debated. They tested theories in ritual, observed outcomes, and refined understanding through experience. The library became a living laboratory where knowledge was not static, but a tool to shape thought, strategy, and the self. Here, curiosity was disciplined, insight was measured, and the courage to confront forbidden ideas was nurtured within a framework of guidance and reflection. Through these texts, the Hellfire Club cultivated minds capable of navigating both the visible world of politics and the invisible world of ideas and influence, preparing members to act with subtlety, foresight, and power. Though its chambers were hidden beneath English soil, the influence of the Hellfire Club stretched far beyond its walls. Through letters, personal connections, and shared knowledge, the club cultivated a network that spanned continents. Ideas about governance, liberty, and human behavior were carried across the Atlantic to the American colonies, where they mingled with revolutionary thought. Members like Benjamin Franklin embodied this transatlantic bridge, absorbing insights from the underground rituals and applying them to the formation of new political systems. In Europe, too, the club's methods rippled through intellectual circles. Secret correspondences and discreet gatherings enabled the spread of philosophical, economic, and social innovations. The club became a quiet architect of influence, preparing minds to question authority, to anticipate change, and to act with strategy in worlds both familiar and foreign. Through this transatlantic reach, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that power is not solely exercised in the open, but often cultivated in shadow, through observation, experimentation, and the patient shaping of ideas that would one day alter nations. The Hellfire Club understood that human consciousness is shaped not only by thought, but by space, sound, and atmosphere. Its underground chambers were carefully designed to influence perception and emotion. Acoustics carried whispers, music, and incantations in deliberate patterns, while ventilation and lighting created moods of awe, intimacy, or tension. Architecture became a tool, guiding the mind through expectation, surprise, and reflection. Rituals were intertwined with this environment. Ceremonies unfolded with precision, combining gesture, speech, and movement to engage participants fully, psychologically, and emotionally. The interplay of space and action amplified learning, trust, and insight, transforming experience into understanding. Through this synthesis, the club created a laboratory for the mind. Members were trained not only to observe themselves and others, but to sense the subtle cues of context and atmosphere, skills that would prove invaluable in both social and political spheres. In every shadow, echo, and flicker of candlelight, they discovered lessons in influence, perception, and human behavior, lessons invisible to the uninitiated, yet powerful enough to shape the world above. The insights cultivated within the Hellfire Club were not confined to private reflection. They were applied to the arenas of strategy, leadership, and law. In military contexts, members learned to anticipate human behavior, to understand morale, loyalty, and motivation, and to guide decisions with subtlety and precision. They studied hierarchy, command, and the psychology of risk, preparing themselves to influence outcomes without reliance on brute force alone. In legal and governmental spheres, they applied similar principles. Observing how individuals respond to rules, incentives, and authority, members developed strategies to shape consensus, negotiate effectively, and implement reforms in a manner that accounted for human psychology. These applications were grounded in experimentation and observation, refined within the controlled environment of the club. By testing ideas in ritual, debate, and role-play, they discovered patterns and methods that could be translated into real-world influence. Through these practices, the club trained a generation capable of wielding power, with both intelligence and subtlety, demonstrating that the mastery of strategy requires understanding not just systems, but the minds that inhabit them. Within the hidden chambers, knowledge was cultivated not as a static inheritance, but as a living, dynamic process. The Hellfire Club emphasized mentorship, discussion, and guided experimentation, ensuring that each member could grow intellectually and emotionally. Education was experiential. Initiates learned by observing, performing, and reflecting. Immersed in philosophy, art, psychology, and ritual, they were encouraged to question, to challenge, and to innovate, preparing them to navigate complexity in the wider world. Senior members acted as mentors, transmitting insights not only through instruction, but through example, dialogue, and subtle guidance. Every lesson was embedded in lived experience, making knowledge both practical and transformative. This approach created a lasting intellectual legacy. Ideas, methods, and perspectives cultivated in secrecy were carried outward, influencing society, governance, and culture. Though the world often remained unaware, the club shaped minds capable of subtle, profound influence, embedding lessons that would ripple through generations. Beyond ritual and philosophy, the Hellfire Club extended its insight into the practical realm of commerce and industry. The same principles of trust, observation, and psychological awareness that guided ritual and debate were applied to economic ventures. Members cultivated networks of collaboration, leveraging bonds of secrecy and loyalty to facilitate trade, investment, and innovation. They observed human behavior in markets, measured reactions to risk, and learned to anticipate both opportunity and conflict. In industrial contexts, they experimented with organization, motivation, and productivity, seeking methods to enhance efficiency while maintaining harmony among workers. Agricultural practices were refined with a similar eye, balancing innovation, cooperation, and human psychology. The club's members understood that wealth and influence are rarely generated by knowledge alone. They are the product of insight, observation, and the strategic application of understanding. Through these methods, the Hellfire Club silently shaped commerce and industry, embedding lessons in trust, risk, and human nature that would reverberate long after their clandestine meetings ended. Within the shadowed chambers of the Hellfire Club, faith and doubt danced in quiet tandem. The initiates did not merely reject doctrine. They interrogated it, dissected it, and transformed it into a tool of insight. Christian orthodoxy, which governed the visible world with certainty and ritual, was approached not with blasphemy for its own sake, but as a laboratory for understanding human belief, authority, and conscience. Rituals inverted sacred symbols, feasts were staged as mock ceremonies, and prayers were twisted into reflections on human desire and limitation. These acts were simultaneously philosophical and psychological. Members explored how devotion, fear, and hope shape thought, behavior, and loyalty. By experiencing the sacred in altered forms, they gained awareness of the mind's capacity for belief and illusion. Spiritual experimentation extended beyond mockery. Meditation, contemplation, and sensory ritual were designed to reveal the mind's malleability, to cultivate focus, emotional depth, and perceptual insight. Members tested the boundaries of conscience and courage, exploring the tension between societal expectation and personal authenticity. In this delicate balance of reverence and skepticism, the Hellfire Club discovered a profound truth. Faith is not merely inherited, but constructed and lived, and the mind, when guided with care, can navigate morality, desire, and spiritual experience. With both insight and subtlety, the lessons learned beneath the chalk walls prepared members to engage the world above with clarity, to influence society not through overt defiance, but through deep understanding of belief, ritual, and human nature. In this space, the sacred became a laboratory, and the mind became its most attentive student. In the secret chambers of the Hellfire Club, human desire was not condemned nor celebrated blindly, but examined, understood, and sometimes harnessed. Sexuality became a means of exploring the mind, relationships, and social influence. Members engaged in acts that challenged convention, not for mere indulgence, but to illuminate the ways in which desire shapes behavior, loyalty, and decision-making. Through ritualized intimacy, role-play, and observation, they studied consent, attraction, and emotional responsiveness. These explorations revealed patterns: how trust could be deepened, how vulnerability could forge bonds, and how perception could be guided through subtle cues of attention, affection, and restraint. Sex became a lens through which the human psyche could be observed, a laboratory for understanding both self and other. Women, equally active participants, contributed intellect, artistry, and insight. They taught initiates to navigate complex social and emotional terrains, to perceive nuance in expression, and to act with discretion, empathy, and strategy. In this way, sexuality was transformed into psychological practice. Pleasure and observation intertwined. Morality and desire were analyzed, and the club cultivated members who could understand human behavior in its most intimate, subtle, and powerful forms. By the time initiates emerged into the world above, they carried not only experience but profound insight, capable of navigating relationships, influence, and leadership, with an awareness honed in the private, transgressive laboratories beneath the earth. Within the Hellfire Club, the boundaries between art and psychology were fluid, and the environment itself became an instrument of influence. Every painting, sculpture, and theatrical performance was designed to elicit emotion, provoke thought, and reveal human tendencies. Symbolism layered meaning upon meaning, inviting reflection, discussion, and analysis of the unseen currents that shape perception and behavior. Music played a critical role. Melodies, rhythms, and harmonies were employed to calm, to excite, or to unsettle. The interplay of sound and space guided attention, shaping experience and enhancing the transformative power of ritual. Even the architecture and layout of the underground chambers were deliberate instruments. Corridors, ceilings, and hidden alcoves manipulated perspective, while ventilation, candlelight, and acoustics amplified emotion and awareness. The environment became a teacher, showing members how context, design, and atmosphere can subtly guide perception and influence behavior. Through these combined arts, the club trained perception and insight, embedding lessons in creativity, strategy, and psychological awareness. Art, music, and environment were not mere aesthetics, but active elements in a larger experiment, teaching members to perceive, to influence, and to understand the world in ways that extended far beyond the walls of the subterranean halls. As decades of ritual, experimentation, and identity play unfolded, the Hellfire Club faced a quiet, profound challenge. The human mind, when stretched and tested, can fracture under sustained pressure. Some members experienced dissociation, confusion, and emotional strain, a consequence of prolonged exploration of self, morality, and desire. The very practices designed to enhance insight and adaptability sometimes threatened psychological stability. Yet the club responded with ingenuity and care. Therapeutic interventions were devised, drawing on ancient traditions, female wisdom, and intimate mentorship, controlled reflection, ritual adaptation, and emotional guidance restored equilibrium and deepened understanding. This crisis became an opportunity for growth. By confronting the fragility of consciousness, members developed resilience, empathy, and psychological acuity. They learned to manage uncertainty, to integrate multiple selves, and to maintain both discretion and clarity in the face of complexity. The experience reinforced a vital lesson. Power and insight come with responsibility, and mastery of the mind requires vigilance, support, and continual adaptation. Through these trials, the Hellfire Club transformed challenges into profound wisdom, preparing initiates to navigate the world above, with enhanced perception, strategy, and moral discernment. In response to internal challenges and the evolving complexity of its members, the Hellfire Club embraced the principle of controlled chaos. Rituals, interactions, and exercises were intentionally varied, introducing unpredictability to sharpen awareness and adaptability. Through this method, initiates learned to navigate uncertainty, to respond with flexibility rather than rigidity, and to maintain composure amidst shifting circumstances. Every challenge was framed as a lesson in observation, strategy, and emotional control. Controlled chaos also reinforced social cohesion. Members learned to trust one another in unpredictable scenarios, to communicate subtly, and to anticipate reactions. By integrating disorder into structure, the club transformed potential confusion into insight and resilience. The practice extended beyond psychology. It influenced how members approached governance, diplomacy, and negotiation, preparing them to act effectively in worlds where outcomes were uncertain. By mastering the art of adaptation, they cultivated an inner steadiness and a capacity for strategic foresight that distinguished them in both public and private life. Through controlled chaos, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that uncertainty is not a threat, but a tool for growth, learning, and the refinement of human intelligence. Though its chambers were hidden and its practices secretive, the Hellfire Club's influence reached far beyond the confines of Buckinghamshire. Ideas incubated beneath chalk ceilings and candlelight found their way into the currents of revolution, thought, and reform. Members studied authority, obedience, and human motivation, then applied these insights to anticipate social and political upheaval. Transatlantic correspondences carried strategies and philosophical principles to the American colonies, where the seeds of independence were being nurtured. In Europe, too, whispers of radical thought and enlightened skepticism traveled through networks connected to the club. By testing concepts in controlled environments, members were able to refine methods for challenging tradition, guiding opinion, and influencing change without exposing themselves. The club's lessons were subtle but profound. The mastery of human psychology, social dynamics, and ethical courage can lay the groundwork for transformation on a national, even global scale. Though few outside the chambers realized it, revolutionary ideas had been quietly prepared, shaped, and disseminated within the hidden laboratories of the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club's understanding of human nature extended seamlessly into the realm of finance. Members recognized that wealth is not merely accumulated, but cultivated through trust, observation, and strategic insight. Economic ventures became laboratories for social and psychological experimentation. By leveraging bonds of secrecy and loyalty, they facilitated trade, investment, and collaboration in ways that transcended conventional commercial methods. The club observed human behavior in markets, how perception, expectation, and emotion influence decision-making. They tested strategies for credit, risk, and negotiation, learning to anticipate reactions and to create environments where commerce could flourish while maintaining control. Through these practices, early principles of capitalist thought were refined, infused with psychological awareness and strategic foresight. Trust, reputation, and discretion became as valuable as capital itself, demonstrating that influence in business, as in ritual, relies upon the mastery of both human behavior and systemic dynamics. In this way, the Hellfire Club quietly laid foundations for modern economic systems, embedding lessons in negotiation, investment, and strategic thinking that would resonate long after their clandestine gatherings ended. Beyond finance and philosophy, the Hellfire Club extended its insight into the practical mechanics of society, industry, agriculture, and the organization of labor. Members applied observation and psychological understanding to improve productivity. They studied human motivation, workflow, and social dynamics, experimenting with methods that balanced efficiency, cooperation, and innovation. In agriculture, they tested techniques to enhance yield while fostering sustainable practices, recognizing that the behavior of workers and communities was as crucial as any machinery or method. Industrial experiments were guided by similar principles. Workflows were structured to maintain engagement and morale, while subtle incentives and environmental adjustments encouraged focus, creativity, and loyalty. Through careful observation and iterative refinement, the club demonstrated that productivity is inseparable from an understanding of human nature. These innovations were rarely publicized, yet their influence quietly shaped emerging industrial and agricultural practices. By integrating psychological insight with practical application, the Hellfire Club became an unseen architect of societal transformation, showing that mastery of both mind and method can profoundly influence the world beyond hidden chambers. The Hellfire Club's influence extended subtly into the realm of law and governance. Members understood that rules alone do not shape behavior. It is human perception, motivation, and psychology that determine compliance and order. Through careful observation and experimentation, they explored how legal frameworks could be refined to balance justice with societal stability. By analyzing how individuals respond to authority, reward, and consequence, they developed strategies to encourage cooperation, mitigate conflict, and foster trust. These lessons were applied quietly, often through informal networks and personal influence. Members guided policy, advised leaders, and shaped reforms, without overt visibility, ensuring that changes were effective and durable. The club's approach demonstrated a profound truth. Law is most powerful when it aligns with human nature, when it considers not only rules but the minds and hearts of those it governs. In this hidden laboratory of social engineering, the Hellfire Club refined the mechanisms of order, preparing a subtle foundation upon which modern governance could later build, all while remaining largely invisible to the public eye. By the late 18th century, the Hellfire Club had evolved from a secret society into a diffuse network whose influence permeated the structures of society. Its members, once confined to subterranean rituals, now carried lessons into law, education, commerce, and politics. The psychological techniques, strategic insights, and social innovations, developed in hidden chambers, became invisible threads woven through the fabric of Western civilization. Revolutions, reforms, and cultural transformations bore the imprint of ideas first tested beneath chalk ceilings. The club demonstrated that profound change does not always announce itself with spectacle or proclamation. It can emerge quietly through understanding, observation, and disciplined experimentation. Its legacy endures in modern psychology, pedagogy, governance, and industry, therapeutic methods, leadership strategies, and organizational structures. All carry echoes of the club's experiments in trust, identity, and influence. Even today, the principles of secrecy, insight, and adaptability inform the way leaders think, societies function, and humans navigate complexity. The Hellfire Club's ultimate achievement was invisibility, to transform society without recognition, to embed radical understanding within the ordinary, and to prove that the mind, guided carefully, can reshape not only itself but the world it inhabits. In the shadows of history, the club reminds us that knowledge, courage, and imagination, when applied thoughtfully, have the power to change everything, and that true influence often begins quietly in the spaces where few dare to look. Even beyond the dimly lit chambers of Buckinghamshire, the lessons of the Hellfire Club found their way into the drawing rooms and salons of Europe. Aristocrats, philosophers, and artists who interacted with its members became unwitting carriers of subtle strategies, radical ideas, and psychological insight. In these salons, conversations were layered with wit, irony, and hidden meaning. Debates on governance, morality, and religion echoed the skeptical and experimental spirit cultivated beneath the chalk ceilings. Yet, few outside the club realized the source: the subterranean laboratories where identity, desire, and authority were dissected, and where the seeds of transatlantic influence had first been sown. Here, the club's methodologies revealed their durability. Ideas, once tested and refined in ritual, could spread through social networks, influencing minds quietly, transforming public opinion and taste, and embedding the lessons of adaptability, strategy, and insight deep within the culture of elite society. The subtlety of influence became a hallmark. Change need not shout to be effective. It often travels softly, like a shadow through conversation, shaping thought, guiding behavior, and preparing the ground for transformations that would one day become history. Amid the flickering candlelight of its underground halls, the Hellfire Club became more than a social experiment. It evolved into a crucible for Enlightenment thought. Members studied philosophy, science, and human nature, pushing the boundaries of reason, skepticism, and critical inquiry. Texts that were forbidden, forgotten, or dangerous were brought into conversation with ritual, debate, and practice. The club's library became a repository not only of knowledge, but of questions designed to challenge authority, interrogate morality, and illuminate the workings of the mind. Through discussion, observation, and performance, members developed intellectual agility, learning to navigate complexity, contradiction, and ambiguity. The philosophical principles of liberty, equality, and rationality were not only studied, but tested in human behavior, in interactions, negotiations, and experiments in social dynamics. This immersion into the Enlightenment created a bridge between secret experimentation and public transformation. Ideas that began as whispers in the chalk mines would echo in academic salons, political assemblies, and revolutionary movements across Europe and the Americas. In this way, the Hellfire Club became both laboratory and launchpad, where the principles of reason, skepticism, and strategic thought were honed, internalized, and sent forth to shape the emerging modern world. While the club's chambers lay hidden beneath English soil, its influence traveled across oceans, carried by correspondence, commerce, and personal relationships. Members maintained connections with thinkers, politicians, and reformers in the American colonies, the Caribbean, and continental Europe. Through these transatlantic networks, ideas were exchanged. Principles of liberty, human rights, and political organization were tested, refined, and adapted to new contexts. The club's members, versed in psychological strategy, understood the subtle power of persuasion, timing, and discretion. They could shape thought and debate without ever revealing themselves. This network became a conduit for revolutionary thought. Letters, essays, and personal discussions carried insights first observed in ritual. How humans respond to authority, to risk, and to moral choice. How loyalty and dissent intertwine. How societal change can be guided through perception and influence. By observing and guiding these distant conversations, the Hellfire Club ensured that ideas developed in private, experimental spaces would manifest in public, transformative events. The American Revolution, the spread of Republican ideals, and the questioning of entrenched hierarchies all bore the subtle imprint of lessons honed in secret chambers. Even unseen, the club demonstrated that knowledge, when combined with strategy and insight, can traverse oceans and generations, shaping societies far beyond the immediate circle of initiates. Though often overshadowed in historical accounts, women played crucial and transformative roles within the Hellfire Club's networks. They were not passive observers. They were strategists, confidants, and intellectual equals. Women participated as mentors, facilitators, and cultural mediators, shaping discussions, performances, and rituals with intelligence and subtlety. They understood human psychology innately, perceiving nuance in emotion, expression, and intention, and teaching these lessons to the male initiates. In salons and social circles, women acted as conduits of influence, translating the insights and strategies developed in underground chambers into public domains. Through art, literature, conversation, and personal diplomacy, they guided opinion, smoothed negotiations, and cultivated alliances. Their contributions were often invisible, yet profoundly effective. By integrating emotional insight with strategic thinking, women ensured that the club's ideas could move outward, embedding themselves into society, politics, and culture, without attracting suspicion. In essence, the Hellfire Club recognized that power is not only derived from secrecy or knowledge, but also from emotional intelligence, subtle persuasion, and the ability to navigate complex human networks. And women were masters of this art. Within the shadowed halls of the Hellfire Club, rituals were never mere spectacle. They were deliberate experiments on the human mind. Every chant, every gesture, every inversion of sacred symbol was designed to probe perception, test resilience, and expand consciousness. Initiates were guided through experiences that challenged assumptions, disturbed comfort, and revealed hidden aspects of the self. The rituals combined theater, music, architecture, and social interaction to produce controlled psychological effects. Candlelight flickered across carved stone. Echoes resonated through vaulted chambers, and the scent of incense or earth intensified focus and emotion. These orchestrated experiences allowed members to explore identity, experiment with moral decision-making, and understand the subtle workings of trust and influence. By confronting fear, desire, and uncertainty in ritual, they developed insight into both their own minds and those of others. What occurred beneath the chalk ceilings was a profound study of consciousness, a laboratory in which psychology, philosophy, and social dynamics converged. Members emerged from these experiences not merely entertained, but transformed, more perceptive, more adaptable, and more capable of navigating the complexities of both private and public life. Through ritual, the club demonstrated a timeless truth. The human mind can be guided, tested, and expanded, and the careful orchestration of experience can produce insight, resilience, and profound understanding. Hidden behind secret panels and within subterranean chambers, the Hellfire Club housed libraries unlike any other of their time. Here, knowledge deemed forbidden, heretical, or dangerous was collected, preserved, and studied. Ancient texts on religion, philosophy, and esoteric practice rested alongside political treatises and radical ideas. Members read not merely for information, but for insight, for understanding the mechanisms of power, influence, and human behavior. These books served as both guide and laboratory. By interrogating doctrine, tradition, and taboo, initiates cultivated intellectual courage and analytical skill. The materials encouraged questioning of authority, refinement of ethical reasoning, and exploration of identity. Through study, discussion, and applied experimentation, members internalized principles that could later shape policy, diplomacy, and strategy. The club understood that knowledge, especially when hidden or forbidden, has the power to liberate thought, challenge orthodoxy, and provide the tools to transform society. In this secret repository, intellect met audacity, and curiosity became a practice of power. The libraries of the Hellfire Club were not simply collections of texts. They were engines of transformation, fueling minds capable of reshaping both consciousness and the world above ground. Beneath the chalk ceilings of the Hellfire Club, identity was not fixed, but fluid, an experiment to be explored and mastered. Members assumed multiple personas, consciously adopting roles that allowed them to navigate secrecy, power, and social complexity. Publicly, they maintained the appearance of respectability, upholding family, political, and societal expectations. Privately, they explored alternate selves, testing morality, desire, and psychological resilience. This practice revealed the elasticity of consciousness. Initiates learned to integrate conflicting aspects of personality, to observe themselves from multiple perspectives, and to understand how behavior, context, and perception intersect. By experimenting with identity, members gained insight into others' minds. They discerned motives, predicted reactions, and cultivated empathy, while remaining enigmatic, unpredictable, and strategically aware. Through ritual, discourse, and observation, they honed the ability to switch roles, adapt to circumstances, and wield influence without relying solely on overt authority. Ultimately, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that identity is not a static essence, but a dynamic tool, a mirror through which the mind can explore, understand, and ultimately shape the social and psychological world. The Hellfire Club was not only a theater of ritual and experimentation, it was also a crucible for political strategy. Within its hidden chambers, members studied the anatomy of power, how alliances are formed, how loyalty is nurtured, and how perception can be guided to achieve influence. Debates, role-playing, and ritualized scenarios allowed initiates to test negotiation tactics, gauge temperament, and anticipate responses. By understanding the psychological levers of leadership, the club's members could operate effectively both in public and private spheres. They developed subtle methods to guide decision-making, to cultivate support for ideas, and to steer outcomes without overt force. The lessons of secrecy, observation, and adaptability were applied to politics, from parliamentary debate to international diplomacy. By refining strategy in a controlled environment, members honed the ability to influence events and people with precision. Ultimately, the Hellfire Club revealed that the mastery of politics depends not solely on position or authority, but on insight, timing, and the careful orchestration of relationships. Power, when combined with psychological acuity, becomes a tool to shape society, law, and culture in ways both profound and enduring. In the dim, echoing halls of the Hellfire Club, transgression was not merely indulgence, it was education. By breaking taboos, inverting sacred symbols, and challenging societal norms, members explored the boundaries of morality, fear, and desire. These deliberate acts of rebellion created a space for reflection, allowing initiates to understand the consequences of action, the mechanics of persuasion, and the complexity of ethical judgment. Through controlled transgression, individuals confronted discomfort, examined personal limits, and refined self-awareness. They learned to separate impulse from principle, desire from strategy, and risk from opportunity. This method of education extended beyond the personal. It shaped how members approached society, governance, and culture. By mastering the art of navigating forbidden knowledge and taboo, They cultivated foresight, discernment, and influence. In essence, the Hellfire Club turned rebellion into instruction, showing that true learning often arises from challenge, that wisdom can be forged in the crucible of risk, and that understanding human nature requires both courage and imagination. Amid the candlelit chambers and secret passages of the Hellfire Club, members cultivated a profound psychological resilience, an inner fortitude that allowed them to navigate the uncertainties of both ritual and society. Through sustained exploration of identity, morality, and desire, initiates faced experiences that tested focus, courage, and emotional balance. Challenges were carefully designed to provoke reflection, to reveal unconscious patterns, and to strengthen self-awareness. In this environment, resilience was not mere endurance. It was mastery, the ability to integrate contrasting aspects of the self, to maintain clarity amidst chaos, and to respond to complexity with both discernment and creativity. Members learned to observe their own minds and the minds of others, to anticipate reactions, and to influence outcomes without coercion. They honed the skills necessary to act decisively in public life, while remaining adaptable, discreet, and psychologically sophisticated. The lessons of resilience extended far beyond the club's chambers. They prepared members for leadership, negotiation, and innovation, demonstrating that true mastery arises from understanding, experience, and conscious cultivation of the mind. In the hidden laboratories of the Hellfire Club, psychology became practice, and practice became power, quiet, profound, and enduring. Beyond the shadowed chambers and secret rituals, the Hellfire Club's influence reached into the realm of art, music, and literature. Members recognized that culture is both mirror and instrument, a reflection of society and a subtle means to guide thought. Through patronage, they supported artists, composers, and writers who could encode philosophical insight, satire, and psychological nuance into works accessible to broader audiences. The club's ceremonies themselves were performances, blending theatricality, symbolism, and aesthetic sensibility. Lessons learned in ritual, timing, resonance, visual symbolism, and emotional modulation were translated into commissioned works that carried hidden layers of meaning. Music echoed their understanding of mood and mind. Painting evoked moral ambiguity and psychological tension. Literature explored identity, desire, and ethical paradox. Even fashion and design were imbued with subtle signals that reflected the club's values of adaptability, insight, and transgression. Through these interventions, the Hellfire Club shaped taste, conversation, and cultural imagination. Art became a vehicle for education, reflection, and influence, allowing the club's philosophies to ripple quietly through society, touching minds far beyond the confines of its underground halls. In this way, culture was not merely observed, it was orchestrated, a medium through which the club could extend its impact, from secrecy into the visible, lasting world of human expression. Education for the Hellfire Club was never simply about rote learning. It was an intentional shaping of the mind, a cultivation of perception, reasoning, and psychological acuity. Members developed informal curricula that emphasized critical thinking, philosophical debate, and the study of human behavior. Young initiates were guided through exercises that challenged assumptions, tested ethical reasoning, and encouraged imaginative exploration. Lessons in history, politics, and literature were paired with lessons in observation, emotional intelligence, and strategic interaction. Education extended beyond formal instruction. Through ritual, performance, and social interaction, members practiced negotiation, leadership, and persuasion. Mistakes became opportunities for reflection. Failures became exercises in resilience. These educational innovations prepared individuals for public life, enabling them to operate with discretion, confidence, and insight. By integrating psychological awareness with intellectual rigor, the club created minds capable of navigating the complexities of society, while retaining the adaptability to influence, inspire, and transform. Thus, learning was a living process, a continuous dialogue between knowledge, experience, and self-understanding. The Hellfire Club's approach anticipated modern pedagogical methods, proving that true education cultivates not only knowledge, but wisdom, character, and psychological sophistication. Beyond ritual, philosophy, and art, the Hellfire Club mastered the art of information, the subtle science of intelligence, observation, and strategic communication. Members cultivated networks that spanned cities, countries, and oceans, connecting with allies, reformers, and influential figures in every sphere of society. Letters, conversations, and discreet meetings carried insights, warnings, and strategies that shaped decisions far beyond the club's immediate reach. Within the chambers themselves, observation became practice. Initiates learned to read expression, gauge intent, and discern unspoken truths. They experimented with the reliability of memory, the malleability of perception, and the influence of suggestion on behavior. These skills were not theoretical, they were applied. Members could guide negotiations, anticipate political moves, and influence economic or social outcomes without overt authority. The club's network functioned as an invisible intelligence apparatus, its members acting as both observers and agents of subtle transformation. Through these methods, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that knowledge is power, but only when paired with discretion, strategy, and psychological insight. They proved that the shaping of events often occurs quietly, in the spaces where few are watching, and that understanding the human mind is the ultimate tool of influence. Religion, in the eyes of the Hellfire Club, was both a foundation and a frontier, a domain to question, explore, and invert. Within the secret chambers, rituals often deliberately inverted sacred symbols, challenging orthodox beliefs and probing the psychological impact of sacred authority. This was not mere irreverence, it was a form of inquiry, a disciplined exploration of faith, morality, and societal structure. By performing acts that subverted ritual expectation, members confronted fear, guilt, and social conditioning. They observed how belief shapes behavior, how symbols influence emotion, and how collective perception can be guided through ceremony and spectacle. Religious skepticism became a tool for understanding power. The divine authority claimed by church and state could be examined, questioned, and strategically navigated. Members learned to separate outward conformity from inward understanding, gaining freedom to act with insight while maintaining public respectability. Through ritual inversion, the club cultivated cognitive flexibility, moral reasoning, and psychological resilience. These practices prepared members to navigate a world governed by authority, to influence society subtly, and to apply the lessons of human behavior to law, politics, and culture. In essence, the Hellfire Club transformed skepticism into method, ritual into laboratory, and faith into a lens through which human nature could be studied, understood, and guided. In the shadowed confines of the Hellfire Club, sexuality was not simply indulgence. It was a medium for exploration, understanding, and strategic insight. Members engaged in deliberate acts of intimacy and desire, not solely for pleasure, but as a tool to examine human motivation, trust, and influence. These encounters revealed the interplay of power, vulnerability, and consent, and highlighted how emotion and desire shape decision-making and loyalty. Through observation and participation, initiates learned to navigate complex social dynamics, understanding the subtleties of attraction, persuasion, and interpersonal influence. The interplay of secrecy and exposure created psychological tension, which heightened awareness and refined perception. Women in the club played essential and active roles, guiding interactions, shaping outcomes, and contributing intellect and artistry. Sexual experimentation became intertwined with psychological insight, demonstrating that human relationships are as much a laboratory for understanding the mind and society as any written text or ritual. Ultimately, these practices were not about debauchery alone. but about cultivating awareness, adaptability, and strategic acumen. By exploring the intersections of desire, identity, and power, members gained profound understanding of human behavior, a mastery that would later influence social, political, and cultural arenas. While their meetings took place beneath English soil, the Hellfire Club's influence extended across oceans, shaping the course of political change in the American colonies. Members corresponded with colonial leaders, thinkers, and merchants, sharing ideas about governance, liberty, and human rights, often embedding subtle guidance within the language of letters and personal discourse. By understanding human psychology, negotiation, and persuasion, club members influenced decision-making far beyond their immediate presence. They observed colonial society, anticipating reactions to policy, taxation, and dissent, and provided insight that could steer political currents discreetly. This transatlantic connection demonstrates the club's capacity to act simultaneously as a laboratory, a think tank, and a network of influence. Ideas cultivated in secrecy found fertile ground in distant societies, where revolutionary thought took root, informed by the club's psychological strategies. Through these subtle interventions, the Hellfire Club helped shape not just the ideological foundations of revolutions, but also the practical mechanisms of social organization, negotiation, and leadership. Even unseen, its fingerprints are woven into the narrative of emerging nations, a testament to the power of knowledge, secrecy, and strategic insight. Within the clandestine world of the Hellfire Club, economics was approached as a subtle interplay of trust, strategy, and human behavior. Members engaged in ventures that relied not only on capital, but on relationships, networks of trust built through shared secrets, loyalty, and demonstrated discretion. These economic networks extended across cities, nations, and oceans, allowing members to participate in trade, finance, and investment with extraordinary advantage. By observing psychological patterns and social dynamics, initiates learned to gauge risk, anticipate behavior, and cultivate reliability. Trust became a currency as valuable as gold, and understanding human motivation a tool for financial strategy. Through these carefully nurtured systems, the Hellfire Club demonstrated how economic power could be intertwined with social and psychological insight. Financial innovation was not merely about wealth. It was a method for influencing markets, shaping communities, and consolidating strategic advantage. In essence, the club's approach to economics mirrored its approach to ritual and intellect. Precision, observation, and subtle orchestration allowed them to operate with foresight, discretion, and a transformative impact on the societies they touched. Beneath the echoing stone and flickering candlelight, the Hellfire Club cultivated not only intellect but emotional sophistication. Through ritual, observation, and dialogue, members developed profound emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, understand, and influence both their own emotions and those of others. They practiced empathy, discernment, and psychological attunement, applying these skills to relationships, negotiations, and decision-making. Therapeutic methods emerged naturally from the club's experiments. Rituals to confront fear, exercises in identity integration, and deliberate challenges that revealed unconscious patterns. Members learned to recognize dissociation, projection, and cognitive bias, using insight to guide personal growth and interpersonal effectiveness. This cultivation of emotional and psychological resilience prepared members to navigate social complexity, political intrigue, and leadership roles. It also anticipated principles of modern therapy, demonstrating that disciplined attention to mind and heart could produce both individual transformation and collective insight. In the Hellfire Club, the study of emotion was a practice, and the practice of emotion became a form of power, a subtle, enduring, and profoundly human instrument of influence. The Hellfire Club understood that space itself can shape the mind, and that architecture is a language of influence. Underground chambers, vaulted ceilings, winding corridors, and hidden alcoves were designed to evoke emotion, focus attention, and heighten awareness during rituals and gatherings. Acoustics, lighting, and ventilation were carefully calibrated to enhance sensory perception and psychological impact. Waterways, staircases, and carved stone became instruments to guide movement, encourage reflection, and subtly influence behavior. Every corner, shadow, and echo was intentional, a tool for both concealment and revelation. Through environmental design, the club amplified the power of ritual, reinforced lessons in perception and identity, and cultivated a heightened state of presence and responsiveness. Members learned that understanding space, its psychology and symbolism, was essential not only for ceremonial effect, but also for guiding thought, emotion, and social interaction beyond the walls of the club. In this way, architecture became a silent teacher, and the spaces of the Hellfire Club served as laboratories for the study of consciousness, influence, and human behavior. Within the secretive confines of the Hellfire Club, knowledge and authority were carefully structured. A system of hierarchies and compartmentalization ensured that information flowed selectively, preserving both secrecy and strategic advantage. Initiates were introduced gradually to ideas, practices, and rituals, receiving only what was necessary for their level of participation. This cultivated respect for process, patience, and attentiveness, while preventing disruption of the larger system. Hierarchy was not purely about status. It was a mechanism of learning and psychological development. Members experienced responsibility, oversight, and mentorship in ways that mirrored societal leadership, preparing them for influence in the wider world. Compartmentalization also served as protection. Secrets were insulated, sensitive knowledge was restricted, and the integrity of both ritual and strategy was maintained. Members learned to operate within partial understanding, to make decisions with incomplete information, and to trust in the system, in themselves, and in each other. Through this careful orchestration, the Hellfire Club created a laboratory of social dynamics, teaching the value of discretion, responsibility, and strategic insight. Lessons that would echo far beyond the subterranean chambers, shaping the minds and actions of those who would touch history itself. Art and literature within the Hellfire Club were never incidental. They were deliberate instruments of reflection, persuasion, and subtle influence. Paintings, sculptures, and theatrical performances encoded philosophical, psychological, and political insight. Writers, poets, and playwrights supported by the club explored identity, morality, and power, often embedding layered meaning that could be discerned only by those attuned to nuance. Through these works, the club extended its reach beyond underground chambers, shaping thought, taste, and cultural conversation in public spaces. Symbolism and metaphor became vehicles for teaching, experimentation, and influence, allowing ideas that might be dangerous or controversial to circulate safely. Members understood that culture is both reflection and instrument. By guiding imagination and perception, one can influence behavior, belief, and expectation. Art became a laboratory in which human cognition, emotion, and social dynamics were observed and refined. In this way, creativity was harnessed as both expression and strategy, a subtle bridge between private experimentation and public impact. The club demonstrated that the mind can be shaped not only through instruction, but through experience, narrative, and aesthetic resonance. An enduring lesson in the interplay between psychology, culture, and power. By the 1770s, the Hellfire Club faced a new challenge. The prolonged experiments in identity, ritual, and psychology had begun to generate unexpected dissociative and emotional stresses among members. In response, Dashwood and the senior initiates developed a philosophy of controlled chaos. Rituals and exercises incorporated unpredictability, ambiguity, and novel scenarios, forcing participants to adapt, respond, and integrate experiences dynamically. This approach cultivated flexibility of mind, emotional resilience, and strategic awareness. Members learned to navigate uncertainty, to embrace risk with insight, and to maintain composure while confronting both internal and external challenges. Controlled chaos was also a mirror of society itself. By practicing adaptation in the club's hidden chambers, initiates prepared for the unpredictable currents of politics, commerce, and culture above ground. It became a method for training leadership, decision-making, and social perception. Through deliberate complexity, ambiguity, and challenge, the Hellfire Club refined its members' ability to act with both decisiveness and subtlety. The lessons of controlled chaos transformed not only the individual, but the collective capabilities of the club, demonstrating that resilience and influence are forged in the interplay of structure and unpredictability. The Hellfire Club's influence extended beyond psychology and ritual, reaching into the realms of art and architecture, where aesthetics and function intertwined with strategy. Members commissioned and created works that reflected layered meaning, embedding symbols, moral challenges, and psychological insight within paintings, sculptures, and installations. Architecture was designed to guide perception, emotion, and behavior. From hidden alcoves and winding corridors to vaulted ceilings and echoing chambers, the interplay of light, shadow, sound, and space became a deliberate language, allowing the environment itself to teach, provoke, and transform. Ritual and artistic design merged, reinforcing lessons of observation, adaptability, and identity integration. Through these innovations, the club cultivated not only beauty but understanding. Spaces became laboratories for the mind, art became a tool for influence, and the built environment itself became an instrument of psychological cultivation. This integration of creativity and design demonstrated that human perception, emotion, and cognition can be guided subtly, shaping behavior and thought in ways both conscious and unconscious. The Hellfire Club revealed that true innovation lies at the intersection of imagination, insight, and intention. Long before the rumble of cannon or the Declaration of Independence, the Hellfire Club was quietly observing, analyzing, and anticipating the tides of revolution. Through their studies of human behavior, governance, and social networks, members recognized the conditions that precipitate upheaval: the friction of authority, the dissatisfaction of populations, and the subtle shifts in belief, expectation, and perception. Discussions, role-playing, and correspondence allowed initiates to model potential outcomes of political unrest, to test strategies for influence, negotiation, and adaptation, and to understand the psychology of collective action. The club's members did not merely witness history. They prepared for it, informed it, and subtly guided it. Ideas about liberty, consent, and governance were refined in secrecy, then carried across the Atlantic to shape emerging societies. By anticipating revolutionary change, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that foresight arises not only from intellect, but from disciplined observation, psychological insight, and strategic imagination. They were, in essence, architects of possibility, preparing minds for the unfolding currents of social and political transformation. In the shadows of their underground halls, the Hellfire Club examined not only individual behavior, but the structures of society itself. Members studied the law, social hierarchies, and the administration of justice, questioning assumptions and exploring how rules shape both morality and conduct. Through discussion, ritual, and simulation, they tested methods for influencing behavior, resolving conflict, and promoting stability. Reforms were approached experimentally. By observing human reactions to altered rules and incentives, initiates could discern principles of fairness, obedience, and ethical flexibility. These lessons informed their strategies in governance, negotiation, and civic engagement, preparing them to implement subtle, systemic change above ground. The club's work in social and legal experimentation emphasized psychological insight. Understanding the mind was as essential as understanding the law. They discovered that effective reform requires not only policy, but the shaping of belief, perception, and trust within communities. Through these exercises, the Hellfire Club cultivated leaders capable of innovation. adaptability, and subtle influence, demonstrating that profound social transformation often begins in secrecy, guided by insight, observation, and disciplined experimentation. The Hellfire Club was never confined by geography. Its reach extended across nations, oceans, and continents, connecting minds and ideas in a vast web of influence. Members cultivated relationships with thinkers, politicians, merchants, and reformers abroad, sharing insight and observing societal trends in distant lands. Letters, coded communication, and personal connections allowed them to monitor political climates, economic developments, and cultural shifts, and to influence outcomes discreetly yet effectively. Through these networks, revolutionary ideas found channels of dissemination, and the club's philosophical, psychological, and strategic insights traveled far beyond English soil. Initiates learned to operate simultaneously in local and global contexts, anticipating consequences, building alliances, and navigating complexity with precision. The club demonstrated that influence is not solely a matter of power, but of connectivity, subtlety, and understanding human systems. By mapping the interplay of culture, politics, and human behavior across borders, the Hellfire Club created an invisible architecture of global influence, quietly shaping events and thought in ways the wider world would only later perceive. Perhaps the most enduring influence of the Hellfire Club lay not in politics, art, or wealth, but in the deep understanding of human behavior they cultivated and refined. Through ritual, observation, and experimentation, members mapped the contours of desire, fear, loyalty, and ambition. They learned how identity is constructed, how emotion guides action, and how perception can be shaped through environment, narrative, and interaction. These insights were applied across every sphere of influence: in negotiation, leadership, education, and culture, in commerce, diplomacy, and personal relationships. By mastering the subtle mechanisms of human psychology, the club created agents capable of extraordinary strategic awareness and adaptability. The psychological legacy of the club persists in the invisible architecture of society, in the rituals of education, the structures of governance, the norms of commerce, and the art of influence that shapes collective thought. Their work reminds us that understanding the mind, our own and others, is the foundation upon which societies, movements, and civilizations are built. The Hellfire Club's experiments extended even into the realms of commerce and finance, where human behavior intersects with risk, opportunity, and trust. Members recognized that markets are not abstract systems, but reflections of psychology, expectation, and social interaction. Through careful observation, experimentation, and discreet intervention, they explored methods to anticipate trends, influence confidence, and guide investment decisions. Trust networks formed the backbone of their economic strategies. Loyalty, discretion, and mutual accountability enabled ventures that could not exist in conventional markets. By understanding motivation, perception, and social leverage, the club achieved influence over transactions, partnerships, and financial outcomes. These economic innovations were not simply about wealth accumulation. They were exercises in understanding human systems, testing theories of behavior, negotiation, and incentive. In essence, the Hellfire Club demonstrated that financial systems can be guided, optimized, and transformed through psychological insight, and that subtle understanding of the human mind is as powerful as capital itself. As decades passed, the lessons, practices, and innovations of the Hellfire Club gradually migrated from secrecy into the wider world, shaping society in ways both visible and invisible. Members carried the psychological strategies, educational methods, and ritual insights they had refined underground into positions of influence in government, commerce, and culture. Institutions absorbed their approaches to leadership, negotiation, and problem-solving, often unaware of their origin in the hidden experiments of a secret society. This integration was subtle and strategic. Public respectability masked private sophistication, while the principles of observation, trust, and adaptability guided decision-making. Through education, business practices, legal systems, and cultural expression, the club's methods became foundational to modern social organization. The Hellfire Club demonstrated that transformation need not always be dramatic or public. It can occur quietly through networks, practices, and the cultivation of insight, embedding profound influence into the very structures of society, while remaining largely invisible to the world at large. Even as the club's formal gatherings waned, its influence continued to ripple through culture, art, and intellectual life. Art, music, literature, and theater bore the subtle imprint of its methods. Layered symbolism, psychological insight, and coded messages that shaped perception. Cultural patrons who had once been initiates carried these lessons into broader society, embedding complexity, nuance, and reflection into public works. Through literature, plays, and visual arts, the Hellfire Club's principles guided imagination, emotion, and thought. They demonstrated that culture is not only entertainment, it is a laboratory for the mind, a means to explore human nature and communicate insight across generations. The club's legacy in the arts reminds us that influence does not always announce itself, and that the shaping of thought, belief, and perception often occurs in the quiet, deliberate spaces where experimentation and insight converge. Its invisible hand can be traced in the subtle ways society learns to reflect, question, and aspire. As the 18th century drew to a close, the Hellfire Club transitioned from an overt secret society into a dispersed network of influence embedded within the very structures of society. Its rituals, psychological techniques, and experimental insights were absorbed quietly into education, governance, and culture. Members moved into positions of power, applying the lessons of secrecy, observation, and human understanding to law, politics, commerce, and social reform. The American and French revolutions, and the transformative ideas that propelled them, carried echoes of the club's philosophical and psychological experiments. Yet the origins remained concealed, an invisible hand shaping outcomes without recognition or attribution. The enduring impact of the Hellfire Club lies in its demonstration that human consciousness, society, and culture are malleable, that deliberate, transgressive inquiry can reshape public life, and that profound social transformation often originates in the hidden, experimental spaces where knowledge is cultivated in trust and secrecy. Its legacy is not merely historical. It persists in the principles of modern psychology, education, leadership, and even the subtle ways society understands influence, identity, and power. The Hellfire Club's understanding of human behavior became a silent blueprint for leadership. Members applied lessons from ritual, psychology, and observation to influence decisions, negotiate alliances, and guide organizations with subtlety. Strategy was informed not merely by knowledge of facts, but by deep insight into the minds, desires, and fears of others. Through careful cultivation of perception and trust, members learned to shape outcomes before crises arose, preparing leaders capable of navigating uncertainty with composure and foresight. Their methods demonstrated that power is most enduring when combined with insight, empathy, and adaptive intelligence, and that influence extends beyond direct authority into the architecture of relationships, perception, and belief. Education within the Hellfire Club emphasized more than information. It cultivated discernment, critical thinking, and emotional resilience. Members were trained to observe, analyze, and integrate knowledge from multiple domains, balancing intellect with intuition, theory with practice. This holistic approach produced leaders capable of navigating complexity, innovating solutions, and influencing society in ways that were subtle yet profound. The club's educational philosophy anticipated modern pedagogy, showing that true learning requires engagement with both mind and character, and that intellectual cultivation is inseparable from psychological awareness and ethical understanding. Through patronage and personal involvement, Members extended the club's philosophy into art, music, literature, and theater. Every commissioned work, performance, and literary creation was an opportunity to explore human nature, communicate subtle ideas, and influence perception without overt instruction. Art became a laboratory for human thought and emotion, allowing initiates to experiment with symbolism, narrative, and cultural resonance. Even as the club faded from public view, its principles lived on in the aesthetic sensibilities and cultural structures that shaped the intellectual and emotional climate of the emerging modern world. The Hellfire Club's understanding of human behavior extended seamlessly into commerce and finance. By cultivating trust networks and observing human motivations, members developed innovative economic strategies that transcended conventional markets. Investment, trade, and partnerships were guided not only by capital, but by psychological insight, loyalty, and subtle influence. These financial experiments allowed members to shape economic outcomes, foster stability, and expand opportunities, while remaining largely invisible to the broader public. In this way, the club demonstrated that economic systems are intertwined with social and psychological dynamics, and that mastery of human understanding can be as valuable as mastery of wealth. Political power within the Hellfire Club was exercised with precision and discretion. Members cultivated connections across parliament, colonies, and international spheres, observing trends, testing ideas, and influencing decisions from the shadows. Through subtle negotiation, correspondence, and strategic alliances, the club's insights into consensus, persuasion, and social dynamics allowed them to guide policies and shape events without public recognition. They demonstrated that true governance relies not only on authority, but on the nuanced understanding of people, networks, and perception, and that influence is most effective when invisible and enduring.